In the quiet town of Havenbrook, the news of Elara Voss and Kael Thorne's engagement spread like wildfire. For months, locals had whispered about the couple, drawn not only to their beauty and charm, but also to the promise of a wedding that would be remembered for generations. Elara was the daughter of a respected art curator, known for her meticulous taste and elegance, while Kael was the son of a successful entrepreneur, admired for his intelligence and quiet confidence. Together, they seemed like the perfect pair, destined to shine at the center of a fairy tale celebration. Plans for the wedding began immediately after the engagement announcement. Invitations were hand-delivered, each carefully written on cream-colored parchment with golden ink. The guest list included prominent families, longtime friends, and even a few curious strangers from surrounding towns, all eager to witness the spectacle. The venue, perched on a cliffside overlooking the ocean, was breathtaking. Lush gardens stretched across the property, dotted with flowering trees and crystal-clear fountains. At sunset, the horizon would glow in shades of pink and gold, a backdrop seemingly made for photographs. Despite the outward perfection, there were signs that not everything was as harmonious as it seemed. Days before the wedding, Elara noticed that some of the delicate floral arrangements had been crushed overnight. No one admitted to touching them, and the security footage revealed only fleeting shadows. She dismissed it at first as a careless delivery mistake, but her cousin, Tavin Reese, who had always been sensitive to the undercurrents of human behavior, felt a chill of unease. He warned himself not to speak too openly, fearing he might be dismissed as paranoid. But the instinct was there, gnawing at him like an invisible alarm. Meanwhile, Kael busied himself with last-minute checks on the venue. He inspected the lighting, the audio systems, and even the seating arrangements, ensuring every detail matched their shared vision. Yet when he tested the sound system, it occasionally faltered, producing a loud static buzz that startled him more than once. The technicians shrugged and assured him it was minor, something easily fixed, but the disruption lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the imperfections were too precise, almost deliberate. On the eve of the wedding, the couple held a rehearsal dinner in a smaller hall adjacent to the main venue. It was meant to be a warm, intimate gathering, yet the atmosphere felt strangely tense. Small accidents began to stack. A fire sparked in the kitchen and was quickly extinguished. A glass centerpiece toppled inexplicably, and the ornamental fountain refused to start despite repeated attempts. Elara tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to nerves, while Kael quietly examined the surroundings, noting that certain objects seemed deliberately placed to be tampered with. Tavin, observing from a distance, could feel the tension radiating off the couple, a silent warning that something was lurking just out of sight. Guests arrived from distant towns, unaware of the subtle disturbances that had begun to unsettle the venue. Some admired the breathtaking scenery, others marveled at the extravagant decorations. Every detail seemed to have been designed to impress, from the hand-painted invitations to the glittering chandeliers that hung like stars above the main hall. Yet, for those attuned to nuance, the beauty felt fragile, as if it were balanced on the edge of disaster. The air carried a strange stillness, a quiet prelude to chaos that only a few could sense. As night fell, a gentle breeze swept across the cliffside gardens, carrying the scent of salt water and blooming roses. Elara stood on the balcony, overlooking the preparations, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. Kael joined her briefly, offering a comforting smile, but the shadows around them seemed to shift and lengthen in ways that made their hearts pound. Beneath the sparkling lights and the carefully orchestrated perfection, an invisible tension grew, wrapping itself around the couple and their guests. No one knew that these subtle signs were the first whispers of a tragedy that would soon engulf everyone present. What began as a celebration of love was quietly being infiltrated by an unseen force, meticulous and patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The air of elegance and joy masked a lurking danger, and in the quiet of that cliffside estate, the stage was being set for a disaster so unimaginable that Havenbrook would never recover. The night before the wedding, Kael Thorne wandered the nearly empty halls of the cliffside estate, checking that every detail had been executed as planned. Guests had departed after the rehearsal dinner, leaving only a skeleton staff to finalize decorations, catering, and technical arrangements. The mansion, illuminated by soft golden lights, seemed almost ethereal, but the beauty could not mask the growing sense of unease that gripped Kael. He had noticed things that didn't make sense. A candle left burning in an unlikely corner, a rope tied around a balcony post that seemed out of place, and the subtle smell of something chemical in the air near the kitchen. At first, he dismissed these as oversights or minor mistakes, but instinct gnawed at him, warning that something more sinister was at play. While exploring the bridal suite to ensure everything was ready for Elara, Kael stumbled upon a series of folded notes tucked beneath the edge of the bedspread. The handwriting was strange, jagged, and hurried, unlike anything he had ever seen before. The messages were chilling in their simplicity. This day will be your last celebration, and trust no one, not even those closest to you. He examined the paper carefully, looking for fingerprints or any clue to the author's identity, but the notes yielded nothing. There was no signature, no hint of motive, only a cold and deliberate warning that struck straight to his core. Meanwhile, Elara remained blissfully unaware of the discovery. She moved through the mansion with practiced grace, inspecting flower arrangements and adjusting the positioning of delicate crystal ornaments. To the outside observer, she seemed calm and radiant, but those closest to her noticed fleeting moments of tension, an anxious glance, a slightly shaky hand, a pause in her usually confident stride. Her cousin, Tavin Reese, who had been uneasy since the floral incidents days before, watched quietly from a corner, unable to shake the feeling that danger was near. He had always been sensitive to patterns of human behavior, and every small anomaly that had occurred in the past week now seemed to connect, forming a silent warning that few else could recognize. As the night wore on, the estate grew quieter, and the wind from the ocean carried a chill that slipped through even the thickest walls. Staff members, tasked with final preparations, whispered among themselves about unexplained sounds and fleeting shadows moving across hallways. One server swore they saw a figure near the main chandelier, adjusting the fixtures with precise movements before disappearing into the darkness. Another claimed to have noticed water sprinklers turned on briefly, even though no one had authorized them. Each incident was dismissed individually, but together, they painted a disturbing picture of meticulous interference. Someone knew the layout intimately and had a plan that remained hidden. Unable to sleep, Kael returned to the chandelier, inspecting it once more. He traced the ropes, examining the hooks and fastenings, and noticed a subtle fraying in one of the main supports. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of detail only someone obsessed with precision would recognize. Panic surged briefly in his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. He considered alerting security, calling off the wedding, or even confronting staff members individually, but hesitated, unsure who could be trusted. The sense of isolation grew heavier, and he felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The lives of their friends, family, and Elara herself were at stake. Unknown to Kael, a shadowy figure had been moving through the property that very evening, observing, touching, and testing. The figure never revealed their face, leaving only footprints and subtle disturbances behind. A deliberately disarranged flower pot, a slightly loosened stair railing, a smudge of grease near a kitchen appliance. Every act was carefully calculated, aimed at creating an environment where disaster could strike with maximum effect. The sophistication suggested not a random saboteur, but someone with an intimate knowledge of weddings, architecture, and human behavior. By midnight, the house was nearly silent. Elara had retired to her suite, unaware of the lurking threats. Kael, unable to sleep, sat in the dim glow of the hallway, replaying the warning notes over and over in his mind. Fear and suspicion gnawed at him, but there was no certainty, no clear path forward. The tension was invisible yet palpable, wrapping around the mansion like a creeping fog. Outside, the wind whipped against the cliffs, and the ocean crashed relentlessly below, a reminder of nature's own unpredictability. No one could have known that these subtle signs, the notes, the shadows, the small acts of sabotage, were the quiet preludes to a catastrophe that would erupt the following day. What seemed like minor disturbances were, in truth, the deliberate orchestration of someone determined to turn a day of joy into one of unimaginable horror. The night before the wedding became a crucible of suspense and dread, where even the most careful observers could not yet grasp the scale of the disaster that awaited them. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, the sun rising over Havenbrook like a promise of joy. Guests arrived early, their laughter and chatter filling the cliffside estate. From the ornate garden paths to the glittering grand hall, every detail reflected months of planning. Flower arrangements glowed in the sunlight. Tables were set with gleaming cutlery, and the chandeliers sparkled like captured stars. Cameras clicked incessantly as friends and family recorded every angle, oblivious to the sense of foreboding that had gripped the mansion the night before. Elara Voss moved through the halls with her customary elegance, adjusting her veil and brushing stray petals from her gown. Her smile was radiant, masking the tiny flickers of worry she felt when she noticed minor imperfections. A table slightly askew, a ribbon that seemed loose, a chair that wobbled unsteadily. She dismissed them as trivial, unwilling to let anything tarnish the culmination of years of planning. Kael Thorne, standing nearby, offered reassurances with a quiet, steady presence. Yet his own anxiety lingered beneath the surface. The warning notes, the frayed chandelier ropes, the subtle tampering. All of it haunted him. He kept glancing toward the ceiling, toward the balcony, scanning for anything out of place, trying to convince himself that he was overreacting. Guests were guided to their seats as the ceremony began. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt water and roses, and for a moment, everything seemed perfect. Music filled the air, delicate and melodious, and the officiant took his place at the front. Elara's entrance was met with applause, her steps measured and graceful. Kael's eyes shone with emotion as he watched her approach. And for a brief instant, the tension that had built over weeks seemed to vanish. The day was a dream, beautiful, radiant, and full of hope. Then, in a matter of moments, the dream shattered. It began with a faint smell of smoke near the kitchen, almost imperceptible at first. Guests shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the source, but staff quickly waved them off, insisting it was minor. Kael, however, recognized the scent immediately as something dangerous. Chemical accelerants that had been deliberately placed to ignite quickly. Panic rippled quietly through the kitchen staff as the fire spread faster than anyone anticipated. Flames licked the walls, and thick smoke began to drift through the ventilation system, creeping into the main hall where the ceremony continued. Simultaneously, the main chandelier, the centerpiece of the grand hall, gave a faint groan. The frayed rope that Kael had noticed days earlier finally succumbed to the tension, snapping under the weight of its own mass. The massive fixture fell, crashing into the center of the gathering with a deafening roar. Guests screamed and scattered in every direction, some narrowly avoiding the deadly swing of falling crystal. Tables overturned, glass shattered, and in the chaos, the ornamental balcony railings, already compromised by deliberate tampering, began to give way. Those standing near the balcony were thrown into a freefall toward the jagged cliffs below. Some guests managed to cling to railings or each other, but the ocean below pulled many into its icy grasp. Waves crashed against the rocks, swift currents dragging some further out to sea. The combination of fire, falling debris, and collapsing railings created a perfect storm of chaos, turning the most joyous event imaginable into a nightmare of survival and death. Amid the chaos, Elara and Kael were thrown apart. Elara tripped on a broken piece of flooring, barely catching herself on the edge of a table. Kael tried to reach her, but a falling beam narrowly missed him, pinning one of the chairs he had been standing near. Screams, shouts, and the crackling of fire filled the hall. The guests who had moments ago smiled and laughed were now fighting to survive, some carrying injured friends, others desperately trying to escape the building that had seemed so secure just hours before. In mere minutes, the cliffside estate, once a symbol of love and celebration, was transformed into a scene of horror. Over 30 guests lost their lives that morning, some from the fire, some from falling debris, and others from the treacherous ocean below. Dozens more were left injured, their screams echoing through the halls as rescuers rushed to save them. The disaster was sudden, overwhelming, and almost unimaginable in its scope. By the time emergency responders arrived, the scale of the tragedy was apparent. The estate was scarred with broken glass, splintered wood, and charred walls. Firefighters worked tirelessly to contain the blaze, while police and paramedics tended to the injured. Kael and Elara, shaken but alive, were forced to confront the horrifying reality. Their dream wedding had become the deadliest event in Havenbrook's history, and the question of who, or what, had orchestrated it would haunt them for years to come. The day after the tragedy, Havenbrook was engulfed in grief and disbelief. The cliffside estate, once the pinnacle of elegance, now stood as a scarred monument to destruction. Charred beams jutted out from the remnants of the grand hall. Shattered glass glinted among broken furniture, and the scent of smoke hung heavily in the air. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, pulling survivors from wreckage, tending to the injured, and cataloguing the devastation. Among the chaos, investigators began piecing together the events that had led to the deadliest wedding disaster in the town's history. From the very start, it was clear that this was not a mere accident. Fire inspectors found traces of accelerants throughout the kitchen, deliberately placed to ensure the flames would spread quickly. Engineers examined the collapsed chandelier and balcony railings, discovering evidence of tampering. Screws had been loosened, ropes frayed intentionally, and structural supports weakened over time. Each piece of evidence pointed to a chilling truth. Someone had planned this disaster meticulously, with intimate knowledge of the venue, the event schedule, and even human behavior under panic. The investigation quickly widened to include everyone involved in the wedding. Planners, decorators, caterers, and staff members were all questioned. Some had alibis, others did not. Taven Rees, still reeling from the night before the tragedy, came forward with observations he had made leading up to the wedding. The crushed flowers, the minor accidents, the strange noises and shadows he had noticed. His account gave investigators a timeline of unusual events, but it also raised more questions than answers. Who had the knowledge and intent to sabotage so many different aspects of the wedding, and why? Attention soon turned to Elara Voss's past relationships. Among the suspects was her former fiancé, a man who had openly expressed anger when the engagement with Kael Thorne was announced. Investigators looked into his whereabouts, searching for any signs that he had orchestrated revenge. Yet handwriting analysis on the ominous notes found by Kael did not match, and no physical evidence linked him directly to the tampering or accelerants. The trail seemed to grow colder with every lead, deepening the mystery. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, examining fingerprints, footprints, and microscopic traces left behind. They discovered subtle residues in the ventilation system and on balcony supports, indicating deliberate interference over a period of weeks, not just a spontaneous act. Security footage from the estate offered glimpses of a shadowy figure moving through the halls, testing the equipment, adjusting the chandelier, and tampering with fire safety devices. The figure's face was always hidden, the movements precise and methodical, leaving investigators frustrated by the lack of identification. As the days passed, the town became consumed with rumors. Some suggested it was an elaborate revenge plot. Others whispered of a jealous wedding planner or a disgruntled vendor. Kael Thorne and Elara Voss, traumatized but alive, struggled with the weight of survivors' guilt. They were forced to relive the horror repeatedly, recounting events for investigators and insurance assessors. Every new revelation added to their anxiety. The fire, the chandelier, the balcony collapse. All of it had been planned, and all of it could have been prevented if only someone had noticed the signs earlier. The case drew the attention of national media, and experts were brought in to analyze the sequence of events. Structural engineers simulated the collapse of the chandelier and railings, confirming that the failures had been intentionally induced. Fire investigators mapped the accelerant patterns in the kitchen, demonstrating that the blaze could not have spread so quickly without deliberate placement. Together, these findings painted a chilling picture of a carefully executed plan. A perfect storm of chaos designed to cause maximum casualties. Despite the mounting evidence, the identity of the perpetrator remained elusive. Investigators theorized that the person had deep knowledge of weddings, human psychology, and building structures. They considered every possibility: a spurned lover, a jealous rival, or someone obsessed with destruction. The town waited anxiously, desperate for answers, while Kael and Elara tried to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in the shadow of horror. Every time they returned to the estate or even walked past it, memories of the disaster struck with brutal clarity, a reminder that this was more than a tragedy. It was a deliberate act of malice. With each day, the mystery deepened. The evidence suggested premeditation, yet the motive remained hidden. The shadowy figure seen in security footage remained unidentified, and despite advanced forensic techniques, investigators had yet to find a conclusive link to anyone. The case became a puzzle, a haunting riddle. Someone had turned a dream wedding into a massacre, and the mind behind it was still at large, watching, waiting, perhaps even satisfied with the chaos left in their wake. Months passed after the disaster, yet Havenbrook remained haunted by the events of that fateful day. The cliffside estate was partially rebuilt, But the memory of the deadliest wedding in the town's history lingered in every corner. Broken glass embedded in the gardens, charred beams left as grim reminders, and memorial plaques commemorating those who had perished. Investigators continued their relentless search for answers, determined to uncover the mind behind the meticulously orchestrated chaos. Each lead was pursued, each clue examined, but the perpetrator had been careful, leaving almost nothing to trace. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Kael Thorne, still consumed by survivors' guilt, began reviewing the security footage in painstaking detail at home, hoping to spot something investigators might have missed. Hours of footage revealed subtle patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. A series of movements consistent with someone performing detailed rehearsals of the sabotage, testing the structural weaknesses and timing of events. One figure stood out, small, deliberate, and precise. The posture, the gait, even the way they adjusted their gloves revealed a familiarity with the estate that was intimate. Almost obsessive, investigators widened their search, examining anyone who had access to the property in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Their attention landed on Lucian Vale, a wedding consultant brought in months before the engagement to help coordinate the event. On paper, Lucian was the perfect professional, experienced, polished, and widely respected in high society circles. But his meticulousness, which had initially inspired confidence, began to reveal an unsettling obsession. Staff recalled his repeated insistence on minor changes, his unwillingness to delegate tasks, and his tendency to linger near structural fixtures that should have been left alone. Forensic evidence confirmed suspicions. Lucian's fingerprints were found on the frayed ropes of the chandelier, fingerprints that had been missed in the initial sweep due to careful cleaning afterward. Accelerant residues matched chemicals stored in a hidden compartment in his personal vehicle. Investigators realized that Lucian had spent weeks studying the estate, understanding the timing of guests' movements, and ensuring that every detail of his plan would succeed. Every accident in the lead-up to the wedding, the crushed flowers, broken ornaments, malfunctioning fountains, had been rehearsals, tests to ensure the catastrophe would unfold flawlessly. The motive emerged as investigators dug deeper. Lucian Vale had been obsessed with perfection to the point of mania. He viewed weddings not as celebrations of love, but as opportunities to demonstrate control over life and chaos. When Kael and Elara's wedding did not meet his impossible standards in his eyes, he decided to create a perfect event in a way only he could define, by orchestrating destruction with surgical precision. The scale of his obsession was horrifying, the realization chilling. This was not about revenge or jealousy, but about a deranged vision of mastery over life and death. The arrest of Lucian Vale sent shockwaves through the community. He maintained a composed exterior, offering only cryptic statements about the beauty of precision and control, leaving everyone unsettled by the cold detachment with which he described the massacre he had engineered. Kael and Elara, though relieved that justice had been served, struggled to reconcile the horror with the man they had once trusted. Their grief was compounded by the realization that someone they had welcomed into their lives had methodically destroyed everything they held dear. In the weeks following the arrest, Havenbrook tried to heal. Memorial services honored the victims, survivors received therapy, and the town slowly attempted to reclaim a sense of normalcy. Yet even as life moved forward, the shadow of the wedding lingered. Every cliffside breeze, every echo of laughter, reminded residents of the fragility of joy and the capacity for darkness hidden behind the most charming smiles. Kael and Elara dedicated themselves to helping others affected by trauma, channeling grief into purpose, while carrying the memory of those lost as a constant weight on their hearts. Though Lucian Vale would spend the rest of his life imprisoned, the story of the tragedy endured. The deadliest wedding disaster had transformed from an unimaginable nightmare into a chilling lesson about obsession, preparation, and human unpredictability. Havenbrook would never forget, and neither would those who survived. Beneath the surface of elegance and celebration, they now understood a horrifying truth. Perfection can mask madness, and even the most beautiful day can hide the seeds of devastation. In the end, the tragedy served as a warning. A wedding that was meant to be remembered for love became infamous for horror, and the lives of those who survived were forever defined not by the joy they had hoped to celebrate, but by the meticulous cruelty of a single mind that turned a dream into a nightmare.